This edition of MacVoices is supported by the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter to keep you up on all the latest from MacVoices. Watch or listen to MacVoices straight from your email client. Sign up at macvoices.com/newsletter and stay up to date. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, this time my guest is the guy who has made so much money he doesn't even need to count it or use a calculator to figure it out. Mr. Kirk McElhearn. Kirk, welcome. It's good to see you.
Where did it go, Chuck? This is the first I've heard of this.
Well, you're the one that said you didn't need to be a calculator expert.
Well, but that doesn't mean I have money. No. So, yeah, Chuck posted something on Facebook. I think it was a link to an article. It's everyone needs to be a calculator expert. And I just put, not me. Yeah. I don't really use a calculator much. I have online accounting software for my business accounting. So I don't have to make any calculations for that. I do calculations for the occasional thing, exchange rates, because I'm in the UK and I mostly work in dollars, but I rarely use a calculator. A lot of times my calculator is Siri. I use Siri for almost nothing, but to do numbers or even to get current exchange rates, I use Siri fairly often.
That's a great idea. I use it, but I admit that's not my first thought when I need to do a simple calculation. And what's wrong with me? Why wouldn't it be?
See, the thing is, I have a good head for numbers. In a previous life, I worked managing pension benefits for a consulting actuarial firm.
Oh, I didn't know that.
This is back in the days of pre-computers. I mean, our company had an IBM mainframe, and we had terminals for some very complex stuff, but everything was done on calculators with paper tape. So I've got a head. I used to be the guy who could look at three numbers and have a pretty good idea what the result would be, no matter how you slice them. Mm-hmm. Over time, that's kind of disappeared, and I can't just say, what's 25% of 768. I used to be able to do that like in a flash, but I rarely need to do that. If I'm cooking, I use an app called Paprika. I don't know if you know it. There's a Mac version, iOS version. And if I want to change the scale, like to do 2 instead of 1 or half instead of 1 unit in the recipe, it does it automatically. So I don't have to calculate ounces or grams or equivalents or anything. You can choose metric or what do you call non-metric for? Technically, it's imperial, right? Cups and ounces and all that. So you can choose, and it does all the conversion for you.
Yes, I know Paprika, but I haven't had the need to do the conversions in it. So,
well, sometimes I get a recipe, and like I got a recipe for risotto cooked in an Instant Pot the other day, and it said serves 4. Now, if I'm going to make 4 servings, I might as well make 6, right? It'll fit in the Instant Pot, and there'll be leftovers. So I just set it to 1.5.
Okay, nice. Yeah. So I didn't realize you're that much of a chef.
I love cooking.
Okay, well we have whole new subjects here to explore.
I go in phases. I really like making bread. I tend to like my partner's English, so she likes to make the sort of English roast dinner, like lamb roast and potatoes and carrots and turnips and mint jelly and stuff like that. I like the more complicated things. I like the alchemy in cooking. So I like making soups. I've been making soups a lot. I got an Instant Pot. I don't use it for all the soups. I love making Boston baked beans. Now, this is, if you've ever done them in a Dutch oven, you're talking about 3 hours cooking, stirring them every 20 or 30 minutes. But as they cook, they convert as the molasses caramelizes and seeps into the beans. And that's what I like. I like taking simple ingredients and coming up with something that's extremely different.
I understand what you're saying. I've tried baking, and I'm just not a baker. It just never works. I'd much rather be a little more freewheeling, throw it in the pot, and see what kind of goes well together and what comes out, and then figure out how to reproduce it. So
I love making bread. I really do, because bread's alive. Bread is, you never know how it's going to turn out from one time to the next. Depends on the humidity a lot. Depends on the temperature. But when it works, like the smell of bread, fresh bread cooking in the oven, slicing it up and slathering butter on it. Oh, I mean, that is just wonderful.
Okay. It's almost lunchtime here, and now I'm really hungry.
Yeah, well,
Thanks.
it's getting close to dinner time here. So
Yeah. So,
actually, my partner's in there making cupcakes today, and I just had one before we started.
oh man.
So
Okay, we're doing it to each other here. This is not good. This is not good at all.
I'll tell you what else I've been discovering in lockdown, and that's cider. Real cider with alcohol, what you call hard cider. I've always been a fan of cider, and I'd go to the supermarkets and I'd say, okay, these are on sale, I'll buy a few. But I started looking into craft cider, and I've been buying from a bunch of small cider producers. I've never been a big fan of beer, but cider is really quite interesting. So I've bought cases of cider since March, and I've been, particularly when we had hot weather, nothing's better than, it's just about 4:30, it's almost cider o'clock, sit down outside with a cold bottle of cider.
I did not know there was craft ciders.
Oh yeah, it's huge. You're just too old. You're not a hipster. If you were hanging out in the hipster bars, you would know about it in the States. I was talking to my friend Ian Schrey in Portland, and I had seen a thing about a particular cider maker in Portland. He says, "Oh yeah, I know that."
Wow. No,
And he's not that young. He's not that hip either.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah, craft cider is wonderful. It really is.
well, right now
And again,
our hip. Sorry.
Again, we're talking alcoholic cider, what you call hard cider, not that sort of, what would you call it, gamey apple juice that you get in gallon jugs.
Right. No, all our hipster bars right now are at 25% capacity, so I couldn't get in anyway, even if I wanted to.
Well, you can order by mail. There's plenty of cider producers that sell by mail order.
That'd be interesting, because I know we have state stores, so we would have a little bit of
For
difficulty.
alcohol.
Yeah, so I'm not sure that they would be allowed to send alcohol through the mail.
Okay.
So, oh well.
See, I can order alcohol on Amazon here.
Oh wow. Well, okay. You're either more enlightened or something. I'm not sure which.
Well, less Puritan in some ways, I think.
Yeah,
my mother lives in South Carolina, and there's a similar, they're not state stores, but they're very tightly regulated. And I think it's still on Sundays. You can't serve alcohol from a bottle. You have to use those little airplane miniatures, even in restaurants.
Didn't know that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ah, well.
Anyway, we've talked enough about technology this time.
Well, I completely took the wrong meaning out of your post. I thought that you just made so much money, you just didn't even need to bother to count it anymore. So.
No,
I think
calculation. Calculation is just not one of those things that's part of my work. Again, I've got accounting software. I have an accountant who checks my books at the end of the year. I rarely have to. So I'll have to sometimes get a ratio of something like dollars to pounds and apply it to a thing to split an invoice as two invoices. You know what I mean?
Right.
But that's the hardest thing. It's like multiplying an invoice by 0.7564. And I use a calculator for that, but that's the level of my calculation.
Do you mind, since we're on the subject, and we'll just roll here for a minute, do you mind telling us what your accounting software is?
I use an app called FreeAgent. It's a web-based accounting program. They're available in the UK and the US. They're really good for small businesses and freelancers.
Okay.
I'll send you a link after we're finished.
Yeah,
I'll
please.
send you a referral link, and if anyone joins, they get, I think, 10% discount, and I get 10% discount.
Oh, cool. Yeah, by all means, because
I've used them since I set up my company here about 7 years ago. They're very good. They're in Scotland. They've got excellent support. And It's really user-friendly. It's not, I mean, I've used accounting software in the past for my business, and it looks like just a spreadsheet, a little bit gussied up, and this is really, the interface on this is quite nice.
Well, and the other thing too about accounting software is some of them have to be built by their very nature to appeal to mid and large size businesses. And
right. And this one is designed for small businesses and freelancers.
Yeah.
Because it's a market that wasn't being tapped. One of the things over here is that a lot of the software that had been for smaller businesses got bought out by bigger companies, who then kind of tried to make it disappear and sell people on the more expensive software.
Right. And we know the Mac software without calling names, some of it has been not updated as much as you'd like. Some of it, as you said, now this is online too, but some people are not comfortable with online software and they were kind of left in a gap. And so I'm always interested to see who's using what and what their impressions are and why. So. Okay.
Well, I looked into a few when I set up my company here, and I think the biggest difference with FreeAgent at the time, and this probably changed, was that they handled multiple currencies, whereas others, you had to pay like £10 a month more to be able to use multiple currencies. And all it means is that in the background, they're doing conversions. They use XC.com to make conversions. So when I issue an invoice in dollars to an American client, they calculate the GBP value at the date. Then when the money comes in, they calculate the value at that date so they can apply the loss or gain from currency conversion. But other than that, it's not really that complicated to have multiple currencies.
Yeah, you wouldn't think so. I mean, other than the exchange rates fluctuating. You would think that that'd be the biggest hassle.
Yeah, but since it's I think you call it cash-based accounting, where it's the value is on the day that you issue an invoice, so the value is kind of frozen at that time. And as I said, when the exchange rates change, I either get more or less, and that just goes into another account saying it's a gain on exchange rate or a gain or a loss on foreign exchange, something like that.
Oh, there you go.
But for me, what's important is that accounting program is easy to use. I can't be spending my time tweaking things. I have invoices, I have bank reconciliation, I have expenses. I drop them in every day. I don't do the end of the month shoebox thing. That's a recipe for failure. You got to do it as soon as you get them out of the way, and then you're not stuck trying to catch up.
Yeah, it's like paying your bills. Some people like to wait and it's to one day a month and then pay them all. And it's like, no, I need to get them done as, scanned for the paper bills or filed the electronic bills and then, move on, because otherwise you end up missing bills or you lose bills or something happens, the odd personal emergency comes up, then you miss your bill payment day and no, not going to work.
Yeah. Speaking of scanning, you use a ScanSnap, right?
Yes.
Have you mentioned on the show that Fujitsu has released a 64-bit version of ScanSnap Manager?
We have discussed it.
ScanSnap Manager. ScanSnap Manager.
We have discussed it. I know. I'm looking forward. I just need to find some time to test it with Catalina. But everything I've seen says that it works great.
I know other people who've tried it and it works fine.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that. The idea that they were able to do this and extend the life of some of the legacy hardware.
Well, the idea that they weren't able to do it was more annoying because it just meant they didn't want to bother. Now, to be fair, I bought I think it's the i1300, so it's the small one. I bought it in early 2013 before I moved from France to the UK because I had this much accounting records on paper and I wanted to scan it all so I didn't have to take it with me. And I literally spent a month scanning 10 years of accounting records, bank statements, invoices, the whole end of year stuff and all that. And God, it was a lifesaver. But I had it for more than 7 years, still works fine. It'd be a shame to have to get rid of it just because they don't want to update the software.
Yeah, we talked about this, the idea that, what is a reasonable expectation for hardware? What kind of lifespan should it have? And the ScanSnaps, listen, they're fantastic, but they are also not inexpensive. And so as a result, 3 years, a 3-year lifespan for a scanner, is that enough? But
it's even worse for people who would have bought one, say, 2 or 3 years ago. Right. Like a year before, didn't know it wasn't going to be upgraded for 64-bit. That's even worse.
Right.
I think a scanner should be like a refrigerator in lifespan. It doesn't do much. It's not like a hard drive that's spinning, and a flat scanner even longer.
Yeah, well, you would think so. But on the other hand, there are plenty of people that right now are running older Macs specifically because they have a flatbed scanner and the drivers haven't been updated for it. And so
there's third-party apps that can do that. With ViewScan, is that the one?
VueScan. Yeah, there's some, but again, they may not deliver all the features or the feature set that the original software did. And so it's listen, In a lot of ways, it's a cheaper alternative. Okay, I'm just going to freeze this Mac at this system software, and that's it. Don't connect it to the internet, so there are no security problems, and you've got your scanning station. It's
If you have an old Mac that you can save, yeah.
Yeah. So we've covered a whole lot here, and we haven't even gotten started. This is good. We went from hard cider to accounting software to scanning software. But we haven't talked for a little while with you about Apple Music and the transition that happened with Catalina, and now we're headed to Big Sur. And so I thought it was about time we sort of took the temperature of Apple Music, both the service and the software, and see what your thoughts are.
Well, it hasn't changed much since Catalina. They've changed the display a bit. They've added another mix. I'm just looking now. I've got a chill mix, a new music mix, a friends mix, favorites mix, and okay, I'm trying to scroll here, and it's not scrolling. So no, there it is. And a get up mix. That's the new one. A get up mix, which is you want to play it to get up. So what have I got? I've got some Clash from London Calling. I've got a Springsteen. I've got Creedence Clearwater Revival, Grateful Dead, etc. I'm just not. I mean, my use of Apple Music is. I don't know. Is it the same as a lot of people? A lot of people, they're just going to go for a playlist. They're going to go for the biggest hits. They're going to put on the Taylor Swift album, and that's mostly what they're going to do. I tend to think, wow, I'd really like to listen to Blind Willie McTell this week. So I'm going to go and put a Blind Willie McTell album on and listen to it. And then the problem is, of course, that it's going to be recommending Blind Willie McTell albums and Mississippi John Hurt and Charlie Patton and Big Bill Broonzy. Great stuff, but it's going to be recommending that stuff for weeks until I've listened to something else. And my problem with Apple Music from the beginning has been the fact that my musical tastes are quite eclectic, and there's no easy way to pigeonhole what I listen to into an easy box with the algorithm. I'm not disappointed in it. And I do find myself, and you as a regular listener of the Next Track podcast, that Doug and I have talked about this many times. And over the years since Apple Music came out, we both slowly shifted over to streaming from listening to music we own. I buy far fewer CDs. I still buy Grateful Dead live releases, the official releases 4 times a year and one big box set. But that's about it. I'll buy CDs to support artists that I really like. I just bought a 7-inch single by the Durutti Column. I don't have a turntable, but Durutti Column is one of my favorite artists. And if I can support Vinnie Riley, who is the Durutti Column, is just one person, I'm more than happy to buy a new record. But other than that, I rarely buy music anymore. And I think this is kind of a bellwether that people like Doug and I, who were both like music geeks and buying a lot, have stopped buying music because it's so easy to stream now.
And the quality of the streaming seems to be adequate for your listening.
It's good enough. I mean, audiophiles are going to grumble about it because, it's, only 256 kilobits per second. But I mean, seriously, dude, if that's, for me, it's music, not sound. Sound is not the most important. I mean, I have good equipment that I use to listen, but the music is far more important to me.
Yeah, I agree. And especially you, as you said, your tastes are rather eclectic. And so not all of the music you listen to was recorded with that kind of fidelity, that audiophile fidelity in mind.
Well, if it was recorded analog, you've got a certain amount of fidelity, but far less than what audiophiles would like you to think in terms of, any kind of frequencies that only bats can hear. But it's more that a lot of things, there's noise on old recordings, and you can filter out some of it. Old tapes. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. There's an interesting system called the plangent process, and it's used to normalize the speed in old tapes. And I know about this because Grateful Dead recordings use this. All the live recordings, come from very old tapes, the 60s and the 70s. What it does is it looks for the 50 hertz, sort of very low volume 50 hertz signal in the background that comes from the electricity, and it normalizes the speed to get that 50 hertz always at 50 hertz at the right pitch. So they're able to fix the speed of old tapes where they might, you know how old tapes might sometimes go like this and like that and and they're able to normalize it. So they're able to do a lot with old tapes to clean them up. They're able to get rid of a lot of noise, but there are limits. If you listen to a Robert Johnson record, I mean, these aren't tapes, these are from 78s, there's no way to get rid of all the noise. And in fact, the noise is part of we're used to the noise in old blues records because that's the way we've always heard them. If we heard them clean, it would sound strange, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And that's what intrigues me, and bootlegs too. I mean, you and I are both bootleg aficionados, and certainly bootlegs seldom have the kind of fidelity that even a professional live recording has. But I mean, you said it earlier, and it's an interesting way to say it. It's the music, not the sound.
Yeah,
and that's another T-shirt motto, no question. Because I think you're right. We so often see the reviews and people get so wound up on things, and my speakers can produce this many thousand hertz, and it's like, but you can't even hear those. So kind of what's the point?
But it's a kind of a religion, and nothing against those people. I mean, I've know a lot of people who are audiophiles, and some of them are really intelligent people. If you listen to Chris Conacher on the Next Track podcast, what I like about Chris, so he runs a website called Audiophile Style. It used to be called Computer Audiophile. He's got $50,000 speakers. He's got a listening room that he recently tweaked with this fancy software that gets the frequency response of the room. But he's all in favor of saying, hey, if that's not your thing, you can get these $200 speakers and they're going to sound good for you. A lot of audiophiles don't think like that. It's, their way is the only way. And I think there's so much of a risk in among audiophiles of each little improvement's going to get this tiny little bit more, and you're never going to get there. Like Zeno's paradox, you go halfway, and the next time you go halfway, and the next time you go halfway, and the arrow never hits the wall. And it seems like, I mean, a lot of people do it just because they like the gear. And they kind of defend it by saying they want to hear the music as the artist intended. It's rarely as the artist intended, and it's just about gear. And if that's what you want, that's fine. As long as you stay away from, all the crazy stuff, like people who keep their cables off the floor, because it sounds better if they're raised off the floor.
I didn't hear that one. I've heard the people that are try to filter the electricity, but I haven't heard of keep the cables off the floor.
There's people who get their own sort of power stations. There was a thing a couple years ago about some guy in Japan who set up his own utility pole to get his power station. So think about this, right? If you're getting power from, well, you're in Harrisburg. You used to have a nuclear power plant. Does it still run?
No, they've shut it down.
No. Okay, so you're getting power from a nuclear power plant or a coal power plant or solar power hundreds of miles away. And it's coming down these wires, and it's crossing wire after wire and substation and transformer and high voltage lines out in the air and wires underground. And you really think that putting a little power conditioner at your end is going to make a difference with all the fluctuations that's happened throughout? But, I could go on forever like that. The one that gets me the most is like these audiophile Ethernet cables. Now, you know that Ethernet is packets. It's ones and zeros. And the way Ethernet works is like every bit of data is split into packets, and they're reassembled when they reach the other end. And there's what's called error correction inside. So there's a calculation. So if anything's missing, the receiver tells the sender, hey, I missed this packet. Please send it again. So it all happens very quickly. But audiophiles think you have to have special cables, and that they sound better if they have the special cables, like they color the ones and zeros. Now, if you think about it logically, if you've ever transferred a Microsoft Word file over a network over Ethernet, and if you got the file and some of the letters were wrong or missing, that would be a big problem. That's kind of the same idea as, audiophiles saying that the Ethernet cable can mess up the music because it's purely digital. Apologies to any audiophiles listening. It's your life, it's your money, but I can understand people paying for quality handmade speakers, amplifiers, even tube amplifiers, because, the distortion in the tubes gives them an interesting sound. But the ridiculousness of claiming that digital cables I see things on the internet, people trying to say which hard drive sounds better when you're just playing music from your music library.
Wow, yeah. You read different sites than I do because I've not heard that one either. But
Oh
it
yeah,
wouldn't surprise me.
yeah.
Wouldn't surprise
Well,
me.
a lot of stuff that goes on um, has historical reasons. So, for instance, if you 20 years ago, if you had your music library on a hard drive and the files were WAV or AIF files, they were pretty big, and the hard drive wasn't fast enough, then the music wouldn't get out quickly enough and you could have issues. And that's 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, maybe. But now these are not problems. Hard drives are fast. Data buses are very fast. IO is very fast. There's still people. So back in the day, people would actually, remember when you could make a RAM disk?
Oh, sure.
So
Yeah.
you could dedicate part of your RAM to put an app in it, and so it would only read from RAM instead of reading from the disk. And it was much faster. So there are people who make RAM disks to run their audio software because they're worried about the software running off a hard disk. But you see, when you launch an app, it goes into the RAM anyway. So I don't know. I find it confusing. And there's others who will make sure they quit every single possible process in the background, even going into terminal to quit things, because that's going to interfere with the sound. And again, 10 or 20 years ago, maybe with very slow processors, that could have made a difference. But we're so far beyond that. You know, we're doing 4K audio on the fly, even in our pockets. Worrying about that sort of thing, I think, is, you know, people need to understand that technology's going forward and they can just give up on some of the accommodations that they may have made for poor technology in the past.
Yeah. But I'm sure SSDs sound better than spinning hard drives.
Of course they do, because there's no rumble. It's the little rumble, you know, when you hear a spinning hard drive, you hear that kind of crunching sound, right?
Yeah.
As the what is it? The heads are moving back and forth.
Right.
And that definitely tinges the ones and zeros.
We're going to get so much mail.
You're going to get so much mail.
Yeah.
I'm not.
You've been feeding the fire here.
Hey, we've said this on the next track plenty of times, and you know, maybe you've got more listeners, and so. But I mean, as I said, if people are into the gear, that they like the gear, then that's fine. It's like buying a car and getting a new carburetor and fancy wheels. It's the same thing. It's an end of itself, but trying to. And people get into endless debates on the internet of trying to explain why a certain Ethernet cable that costs $10,000 sounds better than a $6 Ethernet cable. And that to me is disingenuous. If you're into it for the gear, that's cool. You know, because I mean, gear can be cool. Look at behind you. You got so much gear over there, right?
Oh, sure. I admit, you know, and I know you have your fair share too. And it's fine. I mean, as long as you just look in the mirror and say, this is what I'm enjoying about this.
Yeah.
You know, not that you're in the pursuit of something mythical.
Well, on my end, I've been downsizing a lot of my gear. When I bought the current iMac that I'm using, when I bought it 2.5 years ago, I had gone from a 27 down to a 21.5, simply because I just don't need such a big display. I mean, it's big. It takes up a lot of space, and it kind of overwhelms me. And the work I do really doesn't need that. From my office stereo, I've downsized to a Sonos amp, which is nice. It's small. There's no buttons and knobs, and you know, it's really, I wouldn't say minimalist, but it's getting close. So for a lot of gear things, I have been downsizing lately and trying to simplify, because so many things go wrong. Right? How much time do you spend troubleshooting stuff? I've gotten to the point where there was a period when troubleshooting was interesting because you could learn something from it, right? That you'd apply next time. But now it's just more and more problems that are insoluble, and
I think our expectations have changed, and now you just. At some point, you just want things to work. I don't want to have to sit down and say, "Oh, okay, I've got to solve this problem before I can listen to an album or something." You know, it's like I really expect this to work. Now, if I want to take it to the next level, whatever that means, based on the past conversations we were just having, then fine. You know, I've got a little work to do, and I will probably enjoy that work, or I will enjoy buying a new pair of speakers or something and getting it all hooked up and set up. That that process is part of the fun. But
it is. But then there's also, we have to understand that with certain types of gear, we have to expect that there will be more issues. And one of the things you wanted to talk about is the NAS that I bought recently. I bought a Synology NAS, a network attached storage device. And I hadn't had one of those in years. I had one about 10 or 12 years ago. It was pretty complicated back then. It's not that much simpler. Setting it up is easy, but then you find all kinds of little problems. Let me give you one example. I'm using it for two things. One is it's hosting my Plex video library. The other is I'm using it to back up my iMac and my MacBook Pro. Now, I set up the Synology. I created an encrypted shared folder because I'm not backing up data without encryption. And I ran Carbon Copy Cloner to run a backup, and I got all these errors and couldn't figure out the errors. And well, the first thing I found out was don't use AFP, use SMB, because AFP is deprecated and because whatever. So the second thing I found out is that, and this took me hours to find this, if you set up an encrypted folder on a Synology NAS, you're limited to file names of 143 characters. A non-encrypted folder can use 255, but an encrypted folder only 143. So I have some files in my home folder in the library, like containers and weird cache files that have really long file names. And they would throw up all these errors in Carbon Copy Cloner, and it took quite a while to figure this out.
I did not know about that limitation, the file name size limitation.
Yep.
That's a great tip right there, because you're right.
And these aren't even files that I've named. These are files that are just named by the system. For some reason, they have really long names. I'm going to open this live, and I'm going to give you some examples of some of the names because they are kind of, let's see. So now I know it's going to throw errors every time I do this. Interesting. There's only 4 left because, so I had a bunch of folders. Let me go back in the log. I had a bunch of folders, and I saw this, and I said, well, I'm just going to exclude those folders. They're in the library folder, like caches and things, and I didn't really need to worry about them. Let's see. Authentication failed. See, there was that too. And here's one. The attributes, can't copy attributes. Yeah. So a lot of it's classical music that has very long file names. So for instance, some Bach cantatas, it's the name of the cantata, the name of the aria. So the name of the cantata, the name of the movement, the name of the aria, and all that. So they're very long file names. And so number 1 in BWV 194, Hochster Wunschtes Freudenfest, and then it says 1 Hochster Wunschtes Freudenfest again. And so that throws up an error. So I'm not too worried about a couple of music because I've got several music backups. But finding this out was a half a day. Do I want to spend a half a day trying to figure out stuff like this?
And heaven knows, man, the one place you don't want to have errors thrown up is your backup software, because that's a little terrifying. Kirk McElhearn will be back in the next edition of MacVoices to wrap up our conversation about backing up to NAS drives, getting back into Apple Music and all the streaming services and what's next for them, and a whole lot more. That's next time on MacVoices. I'm Chuck Joyner. Until then, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.